We wrote the book, Catch the American Spirit, that book talking about the founders and the different elements in our nation, all of the things that our nation represents with our Christian founding. I know you've done a lot of research along this line about the spiritual lives of our founding fathers.
We have to look at the current narrative that has been misplaced and inserted into our society today. Back in the 1960s, it was very commonplace for the spiritual lives of our founders to be shared in public textbooks. It was a very common element.
Most of them were professed Christians, and I know there's been a lot of work that the other side has done to try to discredit that, saying they were deists and this and that. But I think every time they do that research, they are always disproven. These men were devout men of God. They actually got on their knees and prayed after they signed the Declaration.
There were 3 instances in the Declaration itself that they're putting their dependence on God.
So these are men of deep prayer and spiritual lives. What does the historical evidence actually, based on your research, what does it show about our founding fathers? What would you say to that?
Well,
hey, welcome back to the Make Jesus Great Again podcast. We are so excited that you're with us today. As always, we are making Jesus great again. Jesus has always been great, but we're reminding ourselves, reminding you about how great Jesus is. And especially today, and over the next few weeks, we're going to have a great time just talking about the greatness of Jesus in America, especially in our founding as a country. We've come through the 250-year celebration, and there's so much that we can continue to say. And with me is my very special friend and guest that's going to help us do this today, Pastor Ray Lacelle. Thank you for joining us, Ray.
So glad to be here, Dan.
You and I have been friends for more than 30 years.
Can you believe that?
And we share the same passion about so many things. We share the same passion about football. We share the same passion about marriage. We share the same passion, our kids, right?
Of course, ministry and
travel,
patriotism,
food, right? Yeah. So all of it, especially patriotism, we share that passion. And so, we wrote the book, Catch the American Spirit, and that book talking about the founders and the different elements in our nation, the markers, the monuments, all of the things that our nation represents with our Christian founding. Right?
It's outstanding. I love the book.
And so today, I know you've done a lot of research along this line about the spiritual lives of our founding fathers. They were very spiritual, right? I mean,
yes, they were.
What are the first things that come to your mind when we say that our founders were very spiritual men?
Well, I think that to answer that, we have to look at the current narrative that has been misplaced and inserted into our society today. Because going back before prayer was taken out of schools back in the 1960s, it was very commonplace for the lives of the spiritual lives of our founders to be shared in public textbooks. It was a very common element. And so right now, when I'm looking at seeing the revival that's taking place, where people are writing books like you have, and I did a few years ago, and we're catching that spirit by others that are saying, wait a minute, we are not going to let these stories be forgotten. It's for the last 30 years, I've studied these things, but I would say there was a series that we did together back in 2023, and you asked me to do the opening for our program on freedom, and the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, write this down as a book. And you remember the excitement that I had. It was an amazing thing, but I started collecting the quotes that our founders had, and I started looking at their lives. I look at the Declaration of Independence, Pastor, because there were 3 instances in the Declaration itself that they're putting their dependence on God. It wasn't their desire to be rebellious and to take on desire to be entrepreneurs and to take on an endeavor that was solely civic or engineered around their own interests, but rather the Bible was the foundation in their lives that motivated the greatest majority of the populace.
Yeah, I mean, 56 men who signed the Declaration, right? Most of them were professed Christians. And I know there's been a lot of work that, the other side has done to try to discredit that, saying they were deists and this and that. But I think every time they do that research, they are always disproven. These men were devout men of God. They actually got on their knees and prayed when they signed the Declaration of Independence, or after they signed the Declaration. So these are men of deep prayer and spiritual lives. So what does the historical evidence actually, based on your research, what does it show about our founding fathers, especially in light of where the secular world tries to discredit them, or revisionists try to remove the stories of their lives? What would you say to that?
Well, there's several things. We can look back to their writings. That's, first of all, what we do as men that study the Bible. We want to look at the original text, and we want to look at the original text of our founders to see what did they write. And when you go back to look at their writings, and you go back to look at the laws that they instituted, the different programs that they put into place, it was designed around the Christian lifestyle that was so prominent. We have to remember when America was getting its beginnings, why did the Pilgrims and why did those that came to America come here to begin with? It was for religious freedom. It was religious freedom. And so the Bible was the most popular book in every household in America.
Wow.
It was known to be the focus of their lives. And they didn't have all of the distractions that we do today.
Yeah.
Now, while philosophy was a very common thought among them, they had
the French Enlightenment.
Yes.
I'm sure that was competition, right?
And of course, there were the Greek scholars and people from ancient Rome that they were looking to for some of their structure and the way that they ordered their lives, and the way that part of those things went into our government structure.
Yeah.
But all of that was through the lens of the biblical understanding that they had. When you look at their writings, it's the scripture that's in their writings and in even our laws that are enacted.
Most people don't know this, but that Congress, actually, after the revolution was over and we won, our independence, the Congress of the United States initiated a proclamation and printing of a Bible, the official Bible, that went through all that. People could get that Bible, in our nation. So it was an act, one of the first official acts of Congress. And why the pressure to remove this great book, the pressure? You talk about the Pilgrims and most people don't know this, but if you go into the rotunda of the Capitol building, there are four massive paintings in there that represent the Christian founding of America.
Yes.
And so why are they in the rotunda for millions of people to see? It was almost as if God wanted the world to know and future generations to know this is how America started. And the Bible was its sure foundation. And
it was.
Another question I have for you, bro, is, who of the founders in your mind were the most outspoken in terms of their quotes or the things that they said? Who led the way? Who was the one that was like the leader in all this?
Well, I guess there's two ways to look at that, because you and I are very demonstrative. We're very outspoken persons. And so
we are?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm told. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
We're a little bit out loud, but there are also those that live their faith that are quieter.
Yeah.
And I look at the life of President George Washington.
Okay.
When you look at any group of men in the military, we played combat sports. We were in a group of guys. We know what it's like when guys are together and you're rambunctious and you're focused as a group. Now take that to another level when you're a group of men that are fighting life and death situations, fighting against an enemy. Yeah. Yet President George Washington made it clear that there would be no cussing, no gambling. He went through the ranks and made it known that his expectation and what he was inspecting was to make sure that they were men of prayer and that they were going to live their lives in such a way that was honorable for the army that he was overseeing.
My goodness.
That's something that is not shared in our history books.
No, it's not. No. And the how many times he actually prayed for providence to intervene with places in their wars and battlefields where they thought they were going to actually lose the war. And suddenly the tide changes unexpectedly. Fog comes in out of nowhere.
Yes.
Fish show up in the water to feed the starving soldiers, right? And basically
It's amazing.
his prayer life, right? And so most people don't really understand that Washington was a man of prayer. So you say he led the way.
He led the way by his example, and he also, in his proclamation to the troops, I don't know if you remember, but the opening lines of the book that I wrote a few years ago, My Sacred Freedom, has the prayer or the declaration that he gave to his troops. I want to read it right now because it's fitting. This is General George Washington, 44 years old, Tuesday, July 2nd, 1776. This is a short statement, and it's so poignant. He said, "The time is now near at hand, which must probably determine whether Americans are to be freemen or slaves, whether they are to have any property they can call their own, whether their houses and farms are to be pillaged and destroyed, and themselves consigned to a state of wretchedness from which no human efforts will deliver them. The fate of unborn millions will now depend, under God, on the courage and conduct of this army. Our cruel and unrelenting enemy leaves us only the choice of brave resistance or the most abject submission. We have, therefore, to resolve to conquer or die." He put his life in the hands of providence.
Wow.
And he was telling his troops, we have no opportunity but to win or die.
Wow.
The only object here is to win the freedom for the future. You and I know at this stage in our lives, we've known each other, as you said, over 30 years. And we've gone through seasons of our life.
Yeah.
As we've grown as men, we have learned that what motivates us far greater than our own goals, ambitions, is for our wife and our children. For our children and their families, their future families. And for us to be motivated by those that are not yet represented, because we're called to take that in consideration. I think of this because 22 years before that, Pastor D, there was a instance where a young general, George Washington, who was fighting for the Redcoats at the time, he was fighting against the British. He was fighting against the French, the French and the Indians. And in the midst of battle, what became the First World War, I'll add. It's called the Great War, I believe, by the Europeans, or the 7-Year War. It was called the French Indian War. And so the French Indian War is what he started, and it was through a misunderstanding. And so in that war, there was a very timely element that took place in this battle, and it was a time where he was fighting all of the other officers that were on horseback, like himself, were being taken out by the young chief that commanded his braves to go after all of the officers on horseback. They got all of the other officers. They took them all out. The Indians did, the sharpshooters. But they kept trying to take down this one who was General George Washington. They could not take him down. And it turned out that at one point, the chieftain commanded his braves to stop shooting at the warrior in whom the Great Spirit was protecting. So he commanded that, and then years later, when General George Washington became president, this man traveled a great distance to pay homage to this now president, to tell him that when he saw all of these things taking place, he knew that God's providence was at work. Later that day, President Washington, the young 22-year-old captain, I guess he was at that time, wrote to his brother about several bullets being shot through his vest. 2 horses being shot out from under him. God was in his midst.
They call him the George Washington that they could not kill. And they sometimes you have there's a reference to this protective hand that was upon him. And the thing that bothers me the most about that story, Ray, is that story was in American textbooks.
Yes, it was.
For up until the 60s. So prior to 1960, you could read this story. You could talk about it in
That's
the
right.
classroom.
That's right.
Teachers could express, oh yeah, this is what happened, because this is actually what happened. There's a record of this happening. And they pulled it out. They pulled that story out because they want to hide, or they want to make over, or revise the amazing founding of our nation. And
To
so
say we're a humanistic society. We're a society that's agnostic, and that was so far from the case.
yeah,
That book, by the way, was documented by, I believe it's David Barton of
Okay.
Wall Builders. It's
Yeah.
called The Bulletproof George Washington.
Yeah.
I bought it over 30 years ago, and it began to cause me to have a curiosity.
Well, that's why we
about
did.
these
That's why we did. Catch the American Spirit, because there's so many things about Washington D.C. or so many things about our founders that people really don't know.
Yes.
You talk about the Christian belief, and they weren't ashamed of their belief. They were in the public about their belief. I think it was Thomas Jefferson that actually went to church at the United States Capitol, which was used as a church building
Yes, it
on the
was.
weekends, right?
It sure was.
It grew to over 2,000 people in attendance, and the Marine Band actually led praise and worship. So this was the day. This was the mood. This was the focus, of the
Yes.
founder. So it wasn't trying to put God under a bucket or a bowl and hiding the light. No, they wanted the light to be front and center. And so they weren't afraid of their faith being in the public square.
In fact, yes, because it's a different mindset that they had back then. The Reformation
Yeah.
had just swept through the colonies
Yeah.
right before the Revolution.
Yeah.
And so there was a great move of the Spirit. You had the Puritans, you had the Pilgrims, and they were very devout, obviously.
Yeah.
That's what led them here.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have not heard this either, is that each of the states were of different denominations.
Really?
The different states that were set up represented different denominations.
No, I didn't know
And so
that.
the sweeping move of the Reformation that took place by horseback preachers that went up and down the seaboard of the United States, the eastern seaboard,
Yeah.
there was a great move of the Spirit
Wow.
in a tremendous way.
This is prior to the Declaration.
Right before our independence was pursued through the Declaration. Yes, so there came a divine dissatisfaction and a divine trust for the Lord, the God Almighty, that blessed the children of Israel. They heard those stories.
Wow.
They heard the comparisons. And while there are comparisons, obviously we are not Israel, but we're a type and shadow of a people who are pursuing him and are seeking after him with all of our heart, is what their mindset was. So when we look at their writings, when we see the Declaration, and if you'll read it, I read it again and again and again on my trip over here on the aircraft. I was reading it over and over.
We hold these
digesting
truths,
it.
to be self-evident, right?
Self-evident that government is not the issuer of our freedoms,
Right.
but it is God.
the
And if
creator.
God gave us those freedoms, then no one can take them away
Yeah.
by the man or the woman of God that will stand for what is true and what is right.
So you're telling me that prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, there was a move of God taking place in the colonies,
Most
a
definitely.
move of the Spirit.
Yes.
And that move really was the precursor to all the thoughts of liberty,
Yes.
justice, freedom, that our rights come from God, not from the king.
Absolutely.
This all happened like through the church?
It happened through the church, through independent. There were little revivals that were taking place. If you look on a satellite photo of the United States and see the lights in the various cities, imagine the
amazing.
revivals that were taking place by horseback preachers.
Wow.
It was a tremendous part of our history that's been removed from our history books for obvious reasons.
It's no wonder why the enemy has fought so hard to remove these stories and these truths.
Yes.
Because really, the birth of our nation, what caused 56 men to actually have the boldness on that day to sign their lives away, literally, right?
Yes.
They signed their lives away, their sacred honor, their fortunes, their reputations.
Everything.
They knew it was going to cost them everything. This was not, like you said, some political advantage that we're going to get, some alliance. They were putting it all on the line. I don't think most people know that several of them had wealthy shipping businesses that were
Mhm.
all destroyed during the revolution. They lost
Yes.
everything. They lost
Yes.
their homes. They lost their families.
Some became penniless. Some lost everything. Some did lose their families. They definitely lost their homes, many of them. There was one of the signers that had to move 5 different times in the span of 5 months to protect himself and his family. Some other people don't realize, and it's so important to talk about this.
Yeah.
The lives of our founders started at 26 and 27 years old. The youngest signers were 26 and 27 years old.
My
The
goodness.
signers on our Declaration of Independence. The oldest, of course, was Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah.
He was either 70 or I think he was 71.
Yeah.
But the greatest majority of those that signed were in their 30s, their late 30s, some in their early 40s.
Wow. They were in the prime of their life.
Yes.
Basically putting their life on the line for the America that we have today.
And some of them were younger than somebody is required to be a president of the United States today.
Yeah.
Yet they had families and they had this understanding that life is bigger than them.
So what would you say to somebody that would say, well, the founders are flawed. The founders, had flaws in their life, and therefore, we can't accept their spiritual proclamations or their spiritual leadership. What would you say to somebody that holds that belief?
I would say they were absolutely flawed, just as God clearly made the decision to show the flaws of every character in the Bible, to show us that in the midst of human frailty and human lacking ability comes the grace and the mercy of God. Because let's not forget, there's certain things that we're ashamed of as a people, that there were people that were not treated correctly.
Right.
The black race, the Indians, the American indigenous Indians.
Yeah.
There's no sugarcoating that.
Yeah.
But it's very important to understand that our founders were very argumentative and determined to make that an issue in the forming of the colonies and getting established our place of freedom. And
I got to tell you this is, and I hope the listener who hears this hears our heart in this matter, because 56 flawed men signed a declaration, and the war was not won until 6 or 7 years later. They declared it first, then the war was won second, and there was a lot of loss. There was a lot of setbacks, right? There were a lot of victories, and there were a lot of betrayals in that whole process. But in the end, the war was won, and we have a declaration, and we have the freedom that we experience today as a nation because of that. Well, the same, I think, could be true and can also be said of the founders who were flawed at that. And we all agree with you, and we're not sugarcoating. I love how you said that. But they were flawed, but they didn't end up there, because their proclamations, the foundations they wrote for the Constitution of the United States, it was all the setup for the freedom for all people, right? So it didn't start out that way, but their spiritual beliefs pointed us in the right direction. So just like the Declaration was signed and we didn't see the winning of the war until 8 years, so the foundation of the country was started, and we didn't actually see the fulfillment of a lot of the freedoms that the Declaration stood for until years later. Right. So, but that's not to discredit their leadership, right?
How can we discredit the leaders for their desire to bring something good that did bring about? Should it have happened sooner? Yes, I wish it had happened sooner.
Right.
For women's suffrage, for people of color, for the Indians to been given the best restitution as possible.
Right.
Nothing about that was right.
Right.
But our desire is to be a righteous nation that's following the scriptures and doing what is right and true according to what God says is right and true.
And so, maybe there's an obvious answer to this question. So it's very obvious that our founders were deeply spiritual.
Absolutely.
And how do you see their spiritual lives influencing the Constitution, influencing the Declaration? You probably touched on some of this, but how do you see the profound influences from their spiritual lives reflective in mainly those two important documents?
Well, I think it's important to know that the Bible was so well taught to all of those that were in the beginnings of our nation throughout.
And let me say this too. Most of those men were trained in seminaries.
Yes.
Today, today that would be the colleges were seminaries, so they were actually learned men and trained in the Bible.
And what was the seminary back then? We know that John Witherspoon, for instance, he was the president, I believe it was Princeton or Harvard.
Wow.
Those Ivy League schools were originally schools of theology,
right,
to train and raise up pastors and ministers.
Wow.
But I think one of the things you asked about the writings, I want to go back to the very fact that America had a textbook in every home, in every part of America. There was a text that was used in order to equip all of the children.
Wow.
And they used the opportunity to teach the scriptures.
Wow.
The scripture was taught to the kids in everyday life. It was taught to them on learning the alphabet. It was taught to them in learning the principles of life in every way.
Someone called it the New England Primer, or the McGuffey Reader was another one that was used back
for
then as well.
150 years.
Yeah.
Until Daniel Webster brought another text
Yeah.
that would be used for the textbook in America. So there was actually one of the first laws that was enacted in our early government. And before actually even we saw these things take place with our founding fathers, there were laws that were established that if there was any group of people of 50 or more, that a teacher would have to be designed and delegated to be the teacher of their community. And then if there were 100 students, they had to have another level of accountability to bring instruction. America was the most literate country in the world at that time.
Wow.
And why was that? Because they wanted I'm trying to remember the name of the law. There was a law that was enacted that said that if we do not have our children literate to be able to read the Bible, they will actually become drawn away by the enemy, by the deluder. There's the word deluder, Satan, act. It sounds like a crazy phrase, the deluder, Satan, act, I believe it was. The deluder, Satan, law. Those words, it's very close to that. Deluder, Satan, act, or law was established to make it mandatory that the Bible would be taught so that the children would not be deceived from not having known the scriptures.
Oh my!
So that
goodness.
truth brought about the New England Primer,
Wow.
brought about those other forms of instruction. But for 150 years, that was the foundation.
I have learned more just sitting here with you than I have in a long time about stuff that people need to know. And I'm glad we're going to make your book available online. And in this program, there'll be a link for anybody that wants to get that book.
It's free, by the way.
Okay. And we'll have a link for Catch the American Spirit as well. So for those that want to go further in this, but let me just ask you this last question as part of this time together.
Yeah.
Okay. So if the founders were here today in 2026, right, what do you think they would say to Americans today?
You know, the first statement that comes to me, freedom is not free. It's not free. It's not free. It's not, we are not entitled to health care. We're not entitled to anything except the pursuit of happiness.
Wow.
It's up to us to do our part. Something that motivated me was something that happened that I'll just share it briefly this way, is that I saw a very ungodly candidate trying to rent our ministry center.
Okay.
They offered double the pay.
Wow.
They offered, we'll just pay you double, whatever it is. We want to use your building.
Wow.
We said, thank you so much for asking. So we're going to offer it to the current governor for $1 because we believe in what he's doing.
Okay.
The governor that we offered it to was someone that is talking about these rights, talking about small government and self-reliance, talking about us having a responsibility for the next generation. Nobody owes me or you or anyone anything except the opportunity. We have an opportunity in this great land. I know your family and mine came from over the sea. They came from Europe.
Beginnings, very humble
and they
beginnings.
came here with the American dream.
Yeah.
And what was the American dream? To roll up our sleeves and work hard and hopefully have a better tomorrow because of our efforts.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan summed up what our founders would say to us right now. This is the last hope for freedom. There's nowhere else for anyone to run. If we do not protect the freedom that we have, there's nowhere else on earth for people to run to for this dream of freedom. Nowhere.
I mean,
So we have to keep it.
We're seeing it right now with the World Cup visitors that are here.
Yes.
They're seeing America. They're like,
I've loved that.
right?
Seeing
oh
them
my gosh, the
overjoyed of all
freedom
the
you have
opportunities.
here to drive and
Yeah.
to these restaurants that are open, the food porches, the hospitality,
Yes.
right? The freedom of America. They're seeing it firsthand.
Yes.
I have been around the world. You've been
Yeah.
around the world. I know when I came back from Africa and almost got thrown in jail when I was over there. Actually, I did get thrown in jail, but I got delivered out of jail. When I got back to the States, I remember being in the tarmac, Ray. I got off the plane on the hot asphalt and kissed the ground because I was so grateful for what America represented and stood for. Because you're 100% right. Where can you go? There is not another place on planet Earth that has the freedoms that we have. With all of our flaws as a nation, with all of our shortcomings as a nation, this still is the greatest country on earth.
And what you were doing when you went on that trip, for those that may not know, you were preaching the gospel. You took the
Yeah.
gospel to a foreign land. And I have to say this. I have a friend that came from an African nation as a missionary to the United States
Wow.
to preach the gospel. In all places, he went to Hollywood to preach the gospel. and he ended up having a great career. He's an attorney and has run for political office. But we have to do our part.
Yeah.
And it's our job, and it's my heart and your heart, I know, for these programs to motivate your viewers
Mhm.
to take action. Because it's not enough to get a great history lesson. It's important that we do whatever our part can be.
Mm.
It's very important.
And so you said, freedom is not free.
It's not free.
That's very profound. Man, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my
I have
pleasure.
learned so much in this little time that we've had together, and I hope you have learned a lot too. Freedom is not free. Jesus said, whom the Son sets free is free indeed. We serve a very free Jesus, and we can serve him freely. And I hope that today's podcast was a blessing to you. Get the materials that we show up on the link and go further. Educate yourself about how our founders really had a tremendous influence on our nation. It's all part of making Jesus great again. He was great in their lives, and he's going to be great in our lives too. So God bless you, and thank you for joining us.